Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I have a really fun topic for this morning. I think you're going to love it. It's all about vulnerability. Who doesn't love talking about vulnerability? Like the vulnerability of doing something for the first time in front of people, the vulnerability of taking over for someone who's usually leading. There is so much vulnerability that is actually happening all the time, all around us. In fact, earlier this week, I was gathered at my house for feminist Torah study, which is something I do monthly, where I say a feminist Torah study isn't about studying women's experience. It's about the people who come to study, bringing their life experiences to the Torah. And so I asked in a go around, what's one thing that made you feel vulnerable just in the last week? And I'm not going to do the same to all of you, but I will just say that there were tears, because admitting and voicing the things that make us feel vulnerable is both powerful and also deeply uncomfortable. Rabbi Brene Brown, I don't know if you've heard of her, I feel like we quote her a lot on this bima, says that staying vulnerable is a risk that we have to take if we want to experience connection. Staying vulnerable is a risk we have to take if we want to experience connection. So I have a few stories this morning that connect that idea both to Sukkot and to today's Parsha. I want to start with our Parsha. Over Yom Kippur, I led a teen talk. Now, if you want to feel vulnerable, try gathering teens and teaching. It's tough. Tough for them, tough for us. I wanted to look at a part of our liturgy that we repeat over and over again in the season of our high holidays. And that part of our liturgy actually comes back in today's Parsha. That liturgy is the 13 attributes of God. And I don't know if you remember, but Rabbi Horowitz mentioned during one of the many times when we were about to say the 13 attributes, that we only include the nice parts. We actually cut the verse off before it gets to a pretty negative claim about God's attributes. First, God is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. That's where we quote. But what I brought to the teens on Yom Kippur, and what we are brought today as we read our Parsha, is the rest of the story. Without even a comma, it says, and God forgives all these things, and sin, yet not remitting all punishment, but visiting the iniquity of parents upon children and children's children, upon the 3rd and 4th generations. So I turned to the teens and I said, is this fair? What do you think? Is this fair? Maybe I could get a raise of hands. Who thinks this is fair? Okay, they agreed. It's not fair. But then I asked a second question. Is this true? And that one was a little bit harder to sit with. Because as we thought about it, we recognized that though we don't like to think about the sins of the parent becoming the suffering of the child, there is a truth to the reality that our generations are interconnected. That the things we experience are sown way before our time, and the things we do have effect long after we're gone. And that our verse is really bringing that reality, that vulnerable reality, to light. The teens and I talked about this for a time, and a lot of what they generated, a lot of what they said in reaction to this feeling that they live, in a sense, on the threshold of the things that they've inherited from previous generations, and also knowing that they are trying to take responsibility for a world that is before them. They talked a lot about feeling like they have a lot of rules, they have a lot of things that they're told to do or not to do, but they feel like the previous generation doesn't understand their world and their reality at all. And that their kind of overwhelming sense is that they're being told what to do by people who themselves don't understand them. When they said that, I realized I also feel like I don't understand the world that I've inherited. We are all living in a time when so much change has defined our reality. And yet, of course, as adults, as elders, maybe as parents, we are responsible for the future. We're responsible for making choices in an environment where we don't always know objectively what is true or right or wrong. And from that place emerges an enormous sense of vulnerability. Taking responsibility for something that you are not in control of is incredibly vulnerable, and yet so vital. This is actually the core lesson of the holiday of Sukkot. And I think this is why we wait until today to read these words in their context. Because this whole season has been preparing us for the reality of trying to dwell in a sukkah. And I don't know about you, it was really nice on the first couple of days of Sukkot where the weather was absolutely delightful. But even this morning, I tried to get myself to have coffee in the sukkah just so I could make a bracha over being in the sukkah. And I lasted for 2 minutes, maybe, tops. It was cold. It was still dark out. I was like, oh my God, my garage is open. What if someone's hiding in the garage? Completely irrational fears. And the reality of our Sukkot, of these dwelling places, is that they're not made to protect us perfectly. They're made to be permeable to the rain. They're made to be permeable to the elements, and yet we still make them. We still construct our environment. We still take responsibility for that act of creating. And I think in there, it reflects this core message that Brene Brown shares so beautifully, that we actually purposely experience vulnerability this time of year in order to remind ourselves that being vulnerable is the seat of, the root of connection. So I have one more story for you, again about teens. In this case, a program that we put on right before the holidays. And we had teens and their parents together in the same space talking about their relationship with social media. And I observed something really profound. At one point, we split them into 2 groups. Young folks, parents. And the young folks group was asked, what's your relationship with social media? What's your relationship with technology? And they shared really openly and vulnerably about their struggles to kind of manage this thing, and yet also the tools and the things that they've come up with that have helped them to navigate it. Things like noting that the sleepaway camp where phones weren't even allowed was way better than the sleepaway camp where they were allowed to have phones. This wasn't an adult telling them you need to stop using your phone. It was them noticing for themselves that they had better experiences of connection and presence without their technology. Meanwhile, in the parent room, the conversation quickly veered away from your own relationship technology and into what is your teen's relationship with technology? What are you going to do to manage them? And I can't even tell you how clear it felt in that moment that that is the disconnect that we actually live in. That we get lost thinking, how can I make it better for someone else? And we don't pause and take the time, especially as a generation that's supposed to be responsible. We don't take time to think about our own relationship with the world, with all the changes that we experience on a daily basis, because it's vulnerable. It's vulnerable to be a parent and to admit, you know what, I have no idea how to manage my own relationship with my phone. And yet, it's true. It's at least true for me. So, I wanted to share this teaching as we think about this. I don't know if it's a promise or a threat or merely an observation from our parsha, that the seeds we sow today will impact the future, but we can't manage that through control. We manage it through taking responsibility for ourselves, being honest and open with future generations about the things we're learning, the things we still don't understand. And we also allow their wisdom to come through, because we are actually all in this together. And I hope that that image of the sukkah, which is permeable and strong, can carry us through the challenge and the gift of vulnerability. I'm going to go over there and tell you what's happening next.